If you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you I was living the dream. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for 7 years. She was gorgeous, smart, and, for the most part, supportive of my ambition. I own a chain of boutique gyms, a business I built from scratch. It's my pride and joy, but it hasn't come without sacrifices. Late nights, early mornings, and constant hustling have taken a toll on our relationship. We weren't always like this. Back when we were just dating, Emily used to talk about how much she admired my drive. "You're going to build an empire," she'd say, her eyes full of admiration. But admiration turned to resentment over time. She complained I was married to my work, and maybe she wasn't wrong. We tried counseling once, but she called it a waste of time after a few sessions. Still, I thought we were solid, or at least salvageable. I believed the foundation of our relationship was strong enough to withstand the cracks. We didn't argue often, and when we did, I usually chalked it up to stress. After all, running a business isn't easy, and Emily had her own challenges working in marketing. But over the past few months, things had shifted. Emily had become distant. I'd catch her staring at her phone, smiling at messages she never shared. She'd started going out more, networking, she'd call it, and coming home late. Whenever I asked about her day, her answers were vague, rushed, like she was brushing me off. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured she was just trying to find her own path, reconnect with herself. I even encouraged her to take on more projects, thinking it might help her feel more fulfilled. But a gnawing feeling in my gut told me something wasn't right. I wasn't sure what it was, yet. Maybe I was being paranoid, or maybe it was just the natural drift of two people who'd grown apart. But in hindsight, I wish I'd paid more attention. I wish I'd trusted my instincts, because the truth was lurking just below the surface, waiting to rip my life apart in ways I couldn't imagine. The cracks in my marriage started to deepen around the same time I began hearing more about Nathan Steele. Nathan was a smooth-talking entrepreneur who had recently opened a high-end gym franchise in the same city. His business model was flashy, state-of-the-art equipment, spa services, and a premium membership fee that practically screamed exclusivity. I'd heard about him from industry circles, but he wasn't just another competitor. Nathan had a reputation, charming but ruthless. His gyms had put more than a few smaller businesses out of operation. He played dirty, luring away employees with promises of higher salaries, and even digging into his competitors' financials to undercut them. The first time I actually met Nathan was at a charity gala. Emily had dragged me along, saying it was good for networking. I wasn't thrilled. Fancy events weren't my thing, but I went to support her. Nathan made his entrance about an hour in, wearing an expensive suit and a smug grin. He worked the room like he owned it, shaking hands and tossing out compliments as if he were handing out $100 bills. When he finally approached us, Emily's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Emily," Nathan said, his voice smooth as silk, "you look stunning tonight." She blushed. Actually blushed. "Nathan, this is my husband, Tyler," she said, barely glancing in my direction. Nathan extended his hand to me, his grip firm and calculated. "Tyler, I've heard a lot about you. You've built quite an impressive operation." "Thanks," I said, keeping my tone neutral. I didn't trust him from the moment we locked eyes. Something about his overly polished demeanor screamed, "Con man." As the night went on, I noticed Emily gravitating toward Nathan. She laughed at his jokes, leaned in a little too close when he spoke, and seemed oblivious to the fact that I was standing right there. I told myself it was nothing, just polite conversation. But something about the way Nathan looked at her, like he knew a secret I didn't, made my stomach churn. On the drive home, I brought it up. "So, you and Nathan seem pretty friendly," I said, trying to keep my voice light. She shrugged, staring out the window. "He's a client," she said casually. "A client?" "Yeah. His team hired me to consult on some marketing campaigns for the new gyms. It's nothing serious, just a side project." Her tone was dismissive, but my gut told me there was more to the story. I wanted to press her, ask why she hadn't mentioned this before, but I didn't. I didn't want to come off as jealous or controlling. I should have asked. I should have done something. But instead, I let it slide, convincing myself it was harmless. Nathan Steele was just a businessman, and Emily was just doing her job. What could possibly go wrong? After that night at the gala, Emily's behavior grew even more erratic. She was always glued to her phone, her face lighting up at every notification. When I asked what was so funny, she'd shrug it off with a vague, "Oh, just group chats." She also started dressing differently, more stylish, more daring. Emily had always had a great sense of fashion, but now it was like she was stepping into someone else's wardrobe. Tight dresses, expensive heels, designer bags. She said she wanted to feel good about herself, but I couldn't help wondering who she was trying to impress. Then came the late nights. "Another meeting?" I'd ask when she'd text me that she wouldn't be home for dinner. "Yeah, sorry," she'd reply. "This new project is insane. Nathan's team is demanding." Nathan. His name was creeping into our conversations more and more, like an unwanted guest in my marriage. Once, I suggested we have a date night to reconnect. She hesitated, saying she was swamped with work but would try to make it work. When she finally agreed, she spent half the dinner scrolling through her phone under the table. "You're distracted," I said, my frustration bubbling over. She sighed, putting her phone down for a moment.
I'm sorry, Tyler.
"It's just, work's been crazy. I'm under a lot of pressure." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think it was just stress, not something deeper. But the cracks were too big to ignore. The final straw came one Saturday morning. I had planned a surprise breakfast, her favorite, blueberry pancakes, and was hoping for a quiet morning together. But when I woke up, her side of the bed was empty. I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Had to run into the city for a meeting. Back this afternoon. Love you." A meeting? On a Saturday? I tried to brush it off, but something didn't sit right. I texted her, asking where the meeting was. "Just at a cafe downtown," she replied. "Don't wait up." That was the moment I knew. I couldn't explain how I knew, but I did. There was no cafe meeting. There was no project. There was only a lie. I spent the rest of the day pacing, debating whether to confront her or let it go. When she finally came home, her hair was slightly disheveled, her lipstick smudged. "How was your meeting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She froze for a split second before smiling. "Productive. Nathan's team has big plans for their next launch." Her words were casual, but her body language screamed guilt. And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't trust her. I didn't say anything else that night, but I knew I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Something was going on, and I was going to find out what it was. The suspicion was eating me alive. Every time Emily's phone buzzed or she stepped out of the room for a call, my chest tightened. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the gaps in her story weren't adding up. One evening, after she'd gone to bed early claiming she was exhausted, I stayed up in the living room, staring at the dark TV screen. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. It wasn't long before my paranoia got the better of me. I walked into our shared home office, where she kept her laptop. Normally, I would have felt guilty about invading her privacy, but this didn't feel normal anymore. This felt like survival. Her laptop was open but locked, and the password field taunted me. I hesitated for a moment before typing in her usual password, our wedding date. To my surprise, it worked. The first thing I checked was her email. Most of it was work-related, but I noticed a string of emails from NS Consulting, Nathan Steele's company. Curiosity turned into dread as I opened the first one. It was harmless enough, discussions about marketing strategies and event planning. But as I scrolled further down the thread, the tone shifted. "Nathan, last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it." "Emily, me too. Can't wait for the next meeting." I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, hoping I'd misread something, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. I needed more proof, something undeniable. The next morning, I called a friend of mine, Mark, who worked in cybersecurity. I didn't give him many details, just that I suspected Emily might be communicating with someone behind my back. He was reluctant at first but eventually agreed to help. That evening, Mark called me. "You're not going to like this, Ty," he said grimly. "Her phone's been syncing to your shared cloud. I found some texts and photos." "What kind of photos?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The kind that make it pretty obvious she's involved with this guy, Nathan. There are messages too, hotel bookings, conversations about how they have to keep things discreet." The world felt like it was spinning. I hung up, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. Emily walked in, cheerful as ever. "Hey, babe, what's for dinner?" she asked, planting a kiss on my cheek as if nothing was wrong. I stared at her, the bile rising in my throat. How long had she been lying to me? How many times had she smiled at me, knowing she was running to him behind my back? But I didn't confront her. Not yet. If she wanted to play games, I would play too. I needed to know just how deep this betrayal went before I made my move. For the next week, I pretended everything was normal. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Smiling at Emily, holding polite conversations, and even sharing a bed with her, all while knowing she was betraying me. Mark had sent me copies of the texts and photos he found. There was no denying it now. Emily wasn't just cheating. She was deep into a relationship with Nathan. They weren't even trying to be subtle. One text from her said, "I told Tyler I had a meeting. Can't wait to see you tonight." Each piece of evidence felt like another stab to my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed a plan, and that meant gathering more information. The next clue came by accident. It was late on a Thursday night, and Emily was working late again. I was pacing the living room when I noticed her handbag on the kitchen counter. Something about the way it was carelessly left there caught my attention. Emily was always meticulous with her things. I walked over, my pulse quickening. Inside, I found the usual items: her wallet, makeup, keys. But then I spotted something odd. A crumpled receipt. I unfolded it, and my blood ran cold. It was from a luxury hotel downtown, dated just 2 nights ago. The bill included room service for 2 and a room number scribbled in pen at the bottom. Suite 1405. I clenched the receipt in my hand, rage bubbling to the surface. How bold could she be? How little respect did she have for me? That night, when she finally came home, she smelled of wine and faintly of cologne. One that definitely wasn't mine. "How was work?" I asked, my tone perfectly neutral. "Exhausting," she said, kicking off her heels. "I'm heading to bed. Long day tomorrow." I watched her walk upstairs, her lies hanging in the air like smoke. I wanted to confront her right then, to throw the evidence in her face and demand answers, but I knew it wasn't the right time. Instead, I called Mark again. "I need more," I said. "What are you thinking?" he asked cautiously. "I want surveillance," I replied, my voice cold. "I need to know exactly where she goes, who she's with, and what they're doing." Mark hesitated. "That's a slippery slope, man. She crossed the line first," I said, gripping the phone tightly. "I just want the truth." Within 48 hours, I had access to a tracker on her phone, along with a discreet camera app that allowed me to monitor her location. I felt dirty for doing it, but my need for the truth outweighed any guilt. The following evening, Emily claimed she had another late meeting. I watched her leave, calm on the outside but boiling inside. 30 minutes later, I saw her location pop up at the same hotel listed on the receipt. I got in my car and drove downtown, parking across the street. From my vantage point, I could see her walking into the hotel dressed to kill. A few minutes later, Nathan pulled up in his flashy car, stepping out like he owned the place. They disappeared inside together, and I sat there, fists clenched, watching the betrayal unfold in real time. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just going to confront her, I was going to destroy her. The next morning, I woke up determined. Watching her walk into that hotel with Nathan had set something loose in me, an anger I didn't know I was capable of. For years, I'd worked hard to build a life for us, sacrificing time and energy for the future we'd promised each other. And this was how she repaid me. I waited until Saturday when I knew we'd have the house to ourselves. Emily came downstairs in her usual weekend loungewear, yawning and scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. "Morning," she said, grabbing a mug for coffee. I didn't respond. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself think. "Tyler?" she asked, glancing over at me. "You okay? Am I okay?" I repeated, setting my coffee cup down a little too hard.
No, Emily.
"I'm not okay." Her brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" I pulled the crumpled hotel receipt from my pocket and slid it across the counter toward her. "Care to explain this?" Her face went pale as she stared at it. For a second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, but then she quickly composed herself. "It's not what you think," she said, forcing a nervous laugh. "Really? Because it looks like you've been booking luxury hotel suites with Nathan Steele." Her eyes darted around the room, like she was searching for an escape. "Nathan and I are working on a project together. Sometimes we need private spaces to—" "To what?" I snapped, cutting her off. "To sleep together? To ruin everything we've built." Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to deny it, but no words came out. "I know, Emily," I said, my voice steady now. "I know about the texts, the photos, the hotel bookings. I know everything." She froze, her mask of confidence cracking. "Tyler, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I can explain." "Explain?" I scoffed, my anger rising. "Explain how you've been sneaking around with my rival while lying to my face? Explain how you've been using my money, our money, to fund your little affair?" "It's not like that," she pleaded, stepping closer. "Nathan, he listens to me. He makes me feel appreciated. Something you haven't done in years."
Ist daher stumped?
"Are you serious right now? I've been killing myself to give us a good life. And you're blaming me for your betrayal." She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "You're always working, Tyler. Always putting the business first." I was lonely. Her words hit like a slap, but I didn't let it show. "So your solution was to sleep with Nathan Steele? A man you know I can't stand." She flinched but didn't respond. "Let me guess," I continued, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is my fault, right? Because I didn't shower you with attention while I was building a future for us." "Don't twist this," she snapped. "You checked out of this marriage long before I did. That did it." I leaned in, my voice low and cold. "You checked out the second you walked into that hotel with him. You destroyed us, Emily. And I promise you, you're going to regret it." For a moment she looked genuinely scared. Then, as if flipping a switch, she straightened her posture and scoffed. "You can't threaten me, Tyler. What are you going to do? Cry about it? Go ahead and play the victim. It's what you're good at." I stepped back, my hands shaking with rage. "You have no idea what I'm capable of," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But you're about to find out." I left the house without another word, slamming the door behind me. My mind was racing, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just going to end with a breakup. Emily and Nathan had taken everything from me. My trust, my pride, my dignity, and I was going to make sure they paid for it. I drove aimlessly for hours after leaving the house, the weight of Emily's betrayal pressing down on me like a boulder. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they hurt, but I didn't care. The more I thought about her lies, her smugness during our confrontation, the more the rage built inside me. But underneath the anger was something darker. Despair. I pulled over to the side of an empty road, leaned my head against the steering wheel, and let out a guttural scream. How had it come to this? How had the woman I loved, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, become a stranger capable of this level of deceit? Images flashed through my mind. Our wedding day, the first apartment we rented together, the nights we stayed up talking about our future. Every memory felt tainted now, poisoned by the knowledge that she'd been sneaking around with Nathan. Couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed by the weight of it all. I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken. For years, I'd put everything I had into our marriage, working late nights and sacrificing vacations so I could build something for us. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being a good husband. But maybe I'd been blind. Maybe I'd ignored the signs for too long, convincing myself that things would get better on their own. I sat there in the car, staring out at the empty road, and realized something that hit me like a freight train. Emily didn't just betray me. She didn't respect me. She didn't respect my time, my effort, or the love I'd poured into our life together. And Nathan, that smug bastard, had the audacity to insert himself into my life. Not just as a competitor, but as a predator who preyed on my wife's insecurities. Couldn't let it go. When I finally drove home, it was late, and the house was dark. Emily was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, staring at her peaceful form, and felt a surge of contempt. She could lie, cheat, and tear our marriage apart, yet still sleep soundly. That was when I made the decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let Nathan keep living his flashy, charmed life like nothing happened. They thought they could humiliate me, destroy everything I'd built, and get away with it. They were wrong. The next morning, I woke up with a grim sense of clarity. The anger and despair were still there, but they had been replaced by something sharper. Focus. If Emily and Nathan thought they could humiliate me and carry on like nothing happened, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. I started by reaching out to Mark again. "I need you to dig deeper," I said. Mark hesitated. "Tyler, I don't know. This is already—" "I'll pay you," I interrupted, my voice cold. "Whatever it costs. Just get me everything you can on Nathan Steele. Business records, personal dirt, anything." Mark sighed but agreed. "You're not going to do anything drastic, are you?" "That depends on what you find," I replied, hanging up. Next, I called a lawyer. A ruthless one I'd heard about from a friend who'd gone through a nasty divorce. Her name was Angela Ross, and her reputation was legendary. When I laid out the situation, she didn't flinch. "Infidelity can be tricky to prove in court," she said, leaning back in her chair. "But if you have evidence, texts, photos, financial transactions, we can make this very uncomfortable for her." "I have all of that," I said, "and I want to make sure she doesn't get a dime more than she's entitled to." Angela smirked. "Let me guess. You want to go for full control of your assets." "Not just my assets," I said. "I want to destroy Nathan Steele. His business, his reputation, everything." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "That's ambitious. But if you're willing to play dirty, I might be able to help." I nodded, my jaw set. "I'm all in." Over the next few days, I started laying the groundwork. I gathered every scrap of evidence I had: texts, emails, the receipt from the hotel, and screenshots from the tracker Mark had installed. I also started making calls to contacts in the fitness industry, subtly spreading rumors about Nathan's questionable ethics and underhanded tactics. But the piece de resistance came when Mark called me back with a bombshell. "Tyler," he said, his voice excited, "you're not going to believe this. Nathan's business isn't as solid as it looks." "What do you mean?" "He's leveraged to the hilt," Mark explained. "Loans, unpaid debts, and some very shady bookkeeping. If someone were to shine a light on this, it could bring him down." A slow smile spread across my face. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Mark wasn't done. "There's more. Nathan's been using offshore accounts to hide assets. If you can get your hands on proof of that, it could ruin him, both personally and professionally." It was perfect. I spent the next week working tirelessly. By day, I went to the gym as usual, pretending everything was fine. By night, I coordinated with Angela and Mark, piecing together the ultimate takedown plan. Emily noticed my change in demeanor. "You've been quiet lately," she said one evening as we ate dinner. "Just busy," I replied, not meeting her eyes. She nodded, clearly relieved that I wasn't bringing up the confrontation again. But little did she know I was just getting started. When I went to bed that night, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just reacting. I was in control. Emily and Nathan had made a mistake. They thought I was weak, that I'd roll over and let them win. They had no idea what was coming. The first step in my revenge plan was ensuring my assets were protected. I met Angela in her sleek downtown office, where she laid out the strategy like a general preparing for war. Step 1, she said, flipping through my financial documents. We'll need to isolate your personal and business accounts from anything Emily can claim during the divorce. You've been the primary earner, and given her affair, we have solid grounds to argue against a 50-50 split. Angela's confidence was contagious, but I was more interested in Nathan's downfall. And what about Steele? I asked. She smirked. Oh, don't worry. I've already flagged a few of his holdings that could be problematic if brought to the right people's attention. Over the next few days, Angela filed motions to lock down my business assets, ensuring Emily couldn't touch the gym or any of the accounts tied to it. She also subpoenaed the financial records Nathan had tried so hard to bury. But my favorite part? The letter Angela sent to Nathan's corporate office, outlining our intent to sue him for damages related to alienation of affection. A rarely used, but still legally valid, claim in our state. It was a long shot, but it would tie him up in court and drag his name through the mud. 2 days later, Nathan's lawyer called Angela, demanding to negotiate. She refused. Let him sweat, she told me with a wicked smile. Meanwhile, I made my own moves. Using the dirt Mark had uncovered, I anonymously tipped off a business journalist known for exposing shady practices. Within 24 hours, an article hit the local news. Luxury gym franchise owner accused of fraud and financial misconduct. It was a small fire, but it spread fast. Members started pulling out of Nathan's gyms. Vendors began demanding payments upfront, and his investors grew nervous. At home, Emily was oblivious to the chaos unraveling around her lover. She spent most of her time texting on her phone or pretending to work on her laptop. Every so often, she'd glance at me like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, but I kept my poker face. One evening, as we sat in the living room, she casually mentioned, Nathan's been dealing with some business issues lately. It's so stressful for him. I bit back a laugh. Oh, must be tough. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing more. The next morning, Angela called me with news that made my day. We've subpoenaed Nathan's offshore accounts, she said. The guy's been dodging taxes and hiding millions. Once this hits, he'll be lucky to avoid prison time. It was everything I'd hoped for and more. Nathan's empire was crumbling, and Emily had no idea she was about to get caught in the rubble. That evening, I poured myself a drink and sat in the dark, savoring the victory that was so close I could taste it. They thought they could humiliate me. They thought they could win. They thought wrong. Nathan's downfall accelerated faster than I could have hoped. The article about his financial misconduct spread, picking up traction in business circles. By midweek, his investors had started pulling out, and several of his gym locations faced sudden closures due to unforeseen financial constraints. Angela worked quietly behind the scenes to leak evidence of Nathan's offshore accounts. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into headlines. Local gym mogul under investigation for tax evasion. The timing was perfect. Emily didn't know I was behind it all, but she started to panic. She spent hours on the phone with Nathan, whispering in the corner of the house like I couldn't hear. One night, she turned to me, her expression tight. Nathan's going through a rough patch, she said cautiously. I feigned ignorance. That's too bad, I said, barely suppressing a smirk. I'm sure he'll figure it out. She looked at me, searching for something in my expression, but I gave her nothing. As Nathan's world fell apart, Emily grew increasingly frantic. She started pacing the house, snapping at small things, and taking calls at odd hours. One evening, I left a printed copy of the article about Nathan's tax evasion on the kitchen counter. When Emily saw it, her face went pale. What is this? She demanded, holding the paper like it burned her. News, I said calmly. Figured you'd want to stay informed about your client. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Instead, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Later that night, I heard her sobbing in the bathroom. I almost felt bad, almost. Nathan's empire collapsed within weeks. The media frenzy over his financial crimes led to a full-blown investigation. Banks froze his accounts, creditors demanded payment, and his gyms began shutting down one by one. Emily, desperate to salvage whatever she could, spent hours on her phone trying to support him. But I knew she was grasping at straws. One night, as she paced the living room, she muttered, "Nathan's going to fix this. He always bounces back." I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Seems like a lot of trouble for a guy who can't even keep his books straight. She froze, glaring at me. For the first time, her confidence cracked. The final step of my plan came together perfectly. With Angela's help, I filed for divorce, citing infidelity and submitting the mountain of evidence I'd collected. Emily was served at home, her face going white as she read the papers. "You're divorcing me?" she stammered, her voice shaky. "You didn't think I'd stay after everything, did you?" I said coldly. But the real blow came later that day. Angela had coordinated with Nathan's investigators, ensuring they knew Emily's involvement with him. When his legal team saw the evidence, Nathan dropped her like a bad habit to save himself. By nightfall, she was alone, betrayed by the very man she'd risked everything for. Emily's world fell apart rapidly. Nathan's betrayal hit her hard, and she had nowhere to turn. The divorce proceedings were swift, thanks to the evidence Angela presented. Emily walked away with almost nothing. No alimony, no claim to my assets, and a shattered reputation. As for Nathan, his legal troubles deepened. The tax evasion case escalated, and I heard whispers of potential prison time. His gyms were finished, his flashy cars repossessed, and his name dragged through the mud. I watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. They had both underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. In the weeks that followed, I began rebuilding, not just my business but myself. The anger had burned away, leaving a strange sense of peace. I wasn't proud of the lengths I'd gone to, but I didn't regret them either. Emily tried to reach out once, leaving a voicemail that I deleted without listening to. She was a chapter one had closed for good. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that betrayal isn't just about infidelity. It's about breaking trust, and once that trust is gone, there's no going back. To anyone reading this, know your worth. Don't let anyone take advantage of your loyalty. And if they do, don't be afraid to fight back. I'm moving forward now, stronger than ever. And this time, I'm leaving the past where it belongs.